Diarmaid Conaráin here, and I'm an independent candidate for the general election in Dublin Bay North. And this is the first video on the hashtag #sFixIreland, which is going to be a series of short videos that I keep adding to over time, where I discuss policies and issues that basically it seems like nobody in the Dáil is willing to or capable of addressing. So the first thing I want to touch on is housing. And what I want to talk about is one of the biggest issues we have in the Irish housing market. But firstly, I want to touch on the three more widely discussed issues, because you can't really talk about housing in Ireland without touching on these three. So the first one is immigration, because we put ourselves on a path that is numerically impossible to continue along. And I believe the only way we're going to solve this housing crisis is basically to grind immigration to a halt for a certain period of years. The second thing is the vulture fund issue. Now, these are lowering the rates of home ownership in Ireland, and they're slowly turning us into a tenant population once again. And they're making a killing while they do it. So this needs to be brought to a halt too. And the third thing we need to talk about is deportations, because it's a much longer conversation about who, when and how. But with even the outgoing government now talking about deportations, it's no longer the taboo subject it used to be. But so with the three of those loosely acknowledged now, I'll move on to what it is I want to talk about. And that's the BER regulation system. And that's BER for Building Energy Rating. And what this involves is the mandatory installation of tens of thousands of euro worth of insulation in an effort to minimise the amount of oil and gas you use to heat your home. So this is pure climate hysteria. That's the only thing fueling this. And in 2019, the mandatory minimum rating was raised again to A2. Now, this is wreaking havoc on the Irish housing market, but the best way to approach it is to just tell you what we can achieve if we completely abandon this. We can achieve three things. We can save ourselves billions that the government is planning on wasting. We can redirect our workforce to potentially double our output in housing. And we can drop, I believe, about 80,000 euro off the cost to build a new home. So how do we accomplish all this? Well, the first part is relatively easy, because the government have an €8 billion grant scheme in play at the minute, in which they want to retrofit 500,000 houses up to a B2 rating by 2030. So we can see the scale of that, 500,000 houses. And if we abandon this immediately, we can save ourselves those billions that they're planning to spend. But much more importantly, we can redirect our workforce. And I'll get into more detail on that in a moment. But it was absolute lunacy to incentivize our construction workers to work on perfectly livable pre-existing homes, when what we need in a housing crisis is as many new homes as we can get. So I'll move on briefly now to how much we can drop the cost of a house by. Because what we know from this retrofit scheme is that to retrofit your house up to a B2 rating is going to cost between 60 to 70,000 euro. And you might think that's bringing a derelict building up to modern standards, but it isn't. Because as we can see here from this man talking about it, to upgrade his home from a C1 rating to a B2 rating was costing 54,000 euro with all the grants deducted. So we can see from this table here that 60 to 70,000 euro is only taking a perfectly livable home to a slightly more efficient home. We're not talking about a derelict building here at all. And this mandatory minimum now of an A2 rating, we can only imagine what that will cost. Because if two levels cost 60 to 70,000 euro, and then you add three more levels on top of that, I think I'm being fairly conservative when I say that we could be knocking about 80,000 euro off the cost to build a new house. I'll get into a bit more detail on how we can benefit from redirecting our workforce. Because what we know is that in 2005, we built 86,000 dwellings. And that accounted for 2/3 of all construction. And what we know around the time of the peak of the boom was that we had about 210,000 construction workers. So we can loosely infer here that it took about 140,000 construction workers to build those 86,000 dwellings. Now we're producing barely over 30,000, which is funny because according to the Irish Independent, in 2022, Ireland had just under 200,000 construction workers. So how can we have almost the same construction workforce and be producing less than half the amount of houses? What is going wrong here? And I believe the problem is the BER regulations and the retrofit scheme, which we've seen has a massive target to try and retrofit 500,000 houses. And I believe this is cutting our potential to build houses in half. And I think if we abolish this, to recap, we can save ourselves billions of euro. We can probably drop the cost of a house by, I would say, conservatively €80,000, and we can potentially double our output in housing. And this can all happen over the next couple of years. All we need to do is abandon the bare regulations, because I don't think as many people in Ireland are attached to climate hysteria as people would have us believe. So I'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks for watching, folks, and please give this a like and a share if you think it's a big issue in Ireland, because I think we can make a massive change here at the stroke of a pen. So, Gura Magat, Slán go fóill.